Hi everybody. By now you should be familiar with the Fusion Damage Assembly preset. If not, there are other videos covering its basic use and workflow. Please take a look at those. At its core, we have these individual meshes. They ultimately become subtractive fusion trims. We refer to that collection of trims as the Fusion Damage Cluster. Those meshes are mapped by the UV transform op from its origin-centered UV reference space to the corresponding UV coordinates of the target mesh. That allows us to transform and reshape the cluster by editing that target mesh, which in this example is simply a plane. All of the cluster's meshes share a set of procedural ops. That includes the UV transform op, of course, plus ops that specify the source geometry of those meshes, as well as control the scale and optional deformation of those meshes. However, their randomized placement and rotation are not controlled procedurally. There are both technical and workflow reasons for this, and I won't get into the details here. Instead, let's focus on the best methods for editing that random scattering of the cluster's meshes. Indeed, the fact that randomization of placement and rotation are not procedural may all be for the best. It turns out that effective cluster arrangements are not best achieved by purely random methods. Additionally, the ability to easily manually edit the cluster meshes individually is often useful. Fortunately, creating new effective randomized cluster arrangements is straightforward thanks to some standard Modo tools. So let's do just that while also looking at how the cluster is constructed with mesh ops. If we deactivate some of the mesh ops, we see that the meshes are tiny at the point where the UV transform op is applied. By scaling them later with a subsequent smooth shift mesh op, we avoid some undesired deformation of the meshes that can occur when the target mesh has significant curvature. That temporary tiny state will conveniently help us see how to best create randomized clusters. As we see here in the assembly's default state, the cluster meshes are very evenly distributed. Looking at the meshes as a group, we see that their locations, naturally, are mixed, as well as their rotations. This particular arrangement, orderly spatial distribution plus random rotation, produces an effective and efficient subtractive cluster. Naturally, we may want to vary the cluster, and there are a couple of easy methods. First, we can reset all of the cluster meshes' rotations. That sets us up with a very orderly arrangement suitable for randomization with Modo's Jitter tool. Jitter is found in the Deform V tab in the same menu as Smooth and Quantize. I recommend not jittering scale because it applies non-uniform scaling, which is generally not beneficial for our purposes. Using a modest range of about 30 millimeters results in an arrangement that still has a reasonably uniform spatial distribution as well as plenty of rotational variation. You may or may not want to randomize the Z position, which will vary the depth of the subtractive cuts. It just depends on the nature of the damage you wish to create. And note that you can always use two separate applications of jitter, one for position and a second one for rotation. Optionally, we can get a truly random spatial arrangement by first resetting all of the mesh positions and then using large X and Y ranges with jitter. Just note that jittering that results in clumps with several meshes in very close proximity or otherwise results in very uneven spatial distribution may not yield the best fusion results. Generally, even distribution helps create efficient fusion models. Naturally, you might prefer applying jitter with the scaled up meshes, with that mesh op enabled. I demoed it here with the tiny meshes just because it clearly illustrates the effect, especially in terms of the spatial distribution. One of the advantages of this randomizing and scattering not being procedural is the easy ability to individually edit the transforms of cluster meshes. It's not uncommon to need or desire tweaking of the individual cluster meshes for aesthetic or other sort of functional fusion purposes. And of course, you are free to do that with Modo's standard transform tools.